What is a secret that you will never tell anyone? Story 1. About a week before I graduated high school, my family experienced a massive house fire. We lived out in the country, and since no one was home, by the time anyone noticed it was on fire, it was already too far gone. Flames were shooting 30 feet above the roof. We lost everything, but thankfully we had insurance and no one was hurt. At the time, I was taking a chemistry class where about 70% of the grade depended on a lab notebook that was graded all at once at the end of the semester. We would do labs every week and then complete write-ups in the notebook. Unfortunately, I had been slacking off and was way behind on the assignment. To catch up, I would have needed to pull a few all-nighters just to turn something in. The day after the fire, I went to class and told my teacher that my notebook had been destroyed in the fire and that I had no idea how I would ever complete the assignment. He was incredibly kind, told me not to worry about it, and gave me 100% on the entire assignment. He said I had bigger things to worry about. I was about to graduate, and he hoped my family was doing okay. Well, the notebook was in my car the whole time. I threw it away and swore myself to secrecy. Story 2. When I was in high school, I had trouble talking to people. I was the shy kid. One day I found out my cousin went to the same school. He was in a similar boat as me, though he was more social and funnier. However, he didn't really click with others, just with me. We became best friends and had a blast at lunch every day. One day, a really cute girl invited me to go eat sushi with her, and I was so excited. I had plans with my cousin. It was sort of a tradition for us, but I decided to bail on him. I told him, "Yo, this really cute girl asked me to eat sushi with her." And although he seemed upset, he told me, "Cool, have fun." When it was time to go eat, I went with the girl. But when we met up with her friends, they decided to eat somewhere else. The problem? There was only room for one more in their car. Without hesitating, the girl said yes, hopped in, and left me behind. I was devastated. I didn't have the courage to face my cousin or tell him what had happened. As I walked through the hallways, I was scared of running into him. Eventually, I passed by the library and saw him sitting there, alone passing the time. It broke my heart. I had ditched him, and for what? Never again. Bros before everything. Story 3. When I was 6, I had an experience I didn't tell my mother about until 15 years later. My paternal grandmother had 2 dogs, Tessa, a ditzy Maltese, and Bindi, a Rhodesian Ridgeback. Tessa was too sweet and clueless to ever be mean, so we always played with her during visits. Bindi, on the other hand, was always locked away in part of the house. When I asked why, my mother would just say, "Bindi doesn't like kids." My mother had reasons to be wary of dogs like Bindi. When I was born, she had to put down her first dogs because they were aggressive toward me, even throwing themselves at windows if they saw me. For the first year and a half of my life, we operated under an airlock system, with 2 doors always between me and the dogs. When my grandmother moved to the house directly behind ours, we installed a gate between our yards. Suddenly, Bindi was accessible. We kept a respectful distance from her most of the time. One day, I was playing in the garden with KD, our very patient Labrador. We were playing circus, a game that KD endured with endless patience. The only thing that ever made him mad was seeing a horse. Bindi wandered into the yard and started watching us. In a burst of foolishness, I ran toward her, trying to involve her in the game. She panicked and bit me. Not hard, but enough to leave some indents and a small bruise. I didn't bleed, but I was scared. So I cried and sulked in my cubby house until I calmed down. I knew I couldn't tell my mom because I'd get in big trouble for playing with Bindi. The next day I was back in the garden with KD, and Bindi was there too, but I ignored her. For weeks I avoided her whenever she came near. Then something changed. Bindi started following me everywhere. She'd sit with me, cuddle on the sofa, and stay at my side wherever I went. It was like she was making up for that bite. From then on, she became my sweet and loyal companion. We were best friends for 4 more years until she passed away. My parents always remarked on how miraculous it was that Bindi, an old ornery dog who hated everyone, had suddenly become this oversized lapdog. Even years after her passing, they marveled at her transformation. I didn't tell my mom until my 20s that the reason Bindi loved me so much was because she had bitten me. Story 4. When I was in 2nd grade, I had one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. 3 days in a row. My teacher had a strict policy, no bathroom breaks, even during free time in class. The first 2 days, I ended up wetting my pants in class because she refused to let me go. The 3rd time, I spent 10 minutes begging her before she finally relented, but I didn't make it. I wet my pants on the way to the bathroom. My family only knows about one of those incidents, but I had to endure the embarrassment 3 times, all in the first week of school. After that, I started bringing a water bottle to class and discreetly peeing in it whenever I had to. I did this for the rest of the year. Looking back, if I could go back in time, I'd tell my younger self to just pee on her desk. That would have been less humiliating than wetting myself 3 days in a row. Story 5. Primera frana warnisha sa yurmernin. When I was a teenager, I saw my friend steal 2 cans of soup. I was on my break at the grocery store where I worked and thought I saw her walk in. Curious, I went looking through the aisles to say hi. When I found her, she had her back to me and was holding a big satchel-style bag. I watched as she quickly tossed 2 cans of soup into it and looked around nervously to make sure no one had seen her. She didn't look behind her. If she had, she would have noticed me. She started walking away, so I called her name cheerfully, as though I'd just spotted her. She turned, looking startled and terrified. She stammered out a quick hello and said she had to run to her mom's car because she forgot something. She didn't come back inside. This was a 16-year-old girl with 3 younger sisters and a single mom who was battling addiction. She had to be more of a parent than her mom ever was. If she was desperate enough to steal 2 cans of soup so her family could eat that night, who was I to embarrass her or say anything to anyone? Story 6. Around 10 years ago, when I was a teenager, my dad, who worked in the video game industry, gave me a high-end gaming laptop worth $3,000. He didn't need it, but he made it very clear. No drinks near the laptop because I was notoriously clumsy. One night, I brought a huge bowl of cereal into my room and set it next to the laptop while I went to get a spoon. I had a blanket over my shoulders and, as I sat down, I accidentally flipped the bowl over. Milk flooded the open laptop. I panicked. I turned it off, cleaned it as best as I could, and went to bed, terrified. The next day, the laptop wouldn't turn on. When my dad asked what happened, I lied, saying it worked perfectly the night before. Years later, I finally confessed to him. To my surprise, he had no idea what really happened. He wasn't even mad. He laughed it off and was impressed that the story had gone viral online. Telling him the truth felt like a huge weight off my shoulders, and I'm glad I finally owned up to it. Story 7. When I was 8 years old, we had pet mice. One of our female mice gave birth, but she started eating some of her babies. I was horrified and distraught. Why would a mother do that to her own babies? Upset and angry, I rushed to tell my stepfather. Instead of comforting me, his reaction was monstrous. He forced me to kill the mother mouse. He filled the sink with water, dragged me into the kitchen, and grabbed my hand. Despite my cries and struggles, he made me hold the mother mouse underwater until she drowned. I was sobbing the entire time, desperately trying to pull my hand away, but he wouldn't let me. As if that wasn't horrifying enough, he then took the surviving baby mice and fed them to his fish. I think it was called an Oscar fish, though I'm not entirely sure. I was too young to understand everything, but I knew this was wrong. My stepfather was a deeply abusive and deranged person. Eventually, my mom left him after he beat her so badly that she almost didn't survive. To this day, I've never told anyone this story. Even though I was just a kid and I know he forced me, the shame and pain still linger. Story 8. I was walking my dog on a dirt road near my subdivision. This road ran parallel to several backyards and was lined with trees, making it feel like a secluded nature trail. It was my escape from people and noise. One morning as I was walking, I spotted 2 of my neighbors. They were both married to other people. They were making out and clearly about to take things further. They were so engrossed in each other that they didn't hear me approaching until my dog barked. We all froze for several seconds, just staring at each other in stunned silence. Then, without a word, they bolted in the direction of their respective backyards. I knew both of them, but we weren't close, and I didn't know their spouses well either. I decided to keep what I saw to myself. Neither of them ever acknowledged what happened, and I've never mentioned it to anyone. I have no idea if that was a one-time thing or part of a long-term affair, but I never saw anything like it again. Story 9. Last Christmas, it was just me and my mom. She's the only family I have. She had prepared a lot of food for the day, but she started drinking heavily and got completely drunk. I didn't realize how bad it was because I was only 17 and had little experience with alcohol. At one point, she tried to cut a piece of pork to give me, but she was so drunk that she couldn't even manage that. About 20 minutes later, she was trying to take the pork out of the oven and ended up dropping it on the kitchen floor. Hot oil spilled everywhere, coating the floor and making a huge mess. As she clumsily tried to pick up the food, she slipped on the oil and hit her head on the floor. She wasn't knocked unconscious, but she was dazed and confused. I had to clean the food off the floor, wipe the oil off her, and carry her to bed. After that, I spent the rest of the night cleaning the kitchen. Once everything was as clean as I could get it, I drove around town looking for a place to eat on Christmas, but nothing was open. I ended up going to bed hungry. To this day, the only person who knows about that night is my girlfriend. Storiten Narration. I've never shared the full details of this story because I'm still deeply unsettled by what I witnessed, or think I witnessed. It's one of those things where no amount of talking about it would ever change what happened. A few years ago, I visited my mother's hometown in Mexico with her and my younger sister. This was shortly after the Durango plane crash, and the anxiety from that, combined with adjusting to the time difference, kept me up late at night. We were staying at my great-uncle's house, where I was sleeping on a futon while my mom and sister shared the bed. One night, as I lay awake playing games on my phone, I heard a gunshot. I live in a dangerous neighborhood back home, so I didn't think much of it at first. Then I heard 2 more gunshots, much closer this time. I thought it could be someone drunk. It was wedding season. Or maybe I was hallucinating from exhaustion. No one else woke up, so I stayed quiet and tried to go back to sleep. The next morning, my mom asked if I'd been awake the previous night. When I said yes, she asked if I'd heard anything. I told her I'd heard gunshots but didn't think it was anything serious. Her face went pale. She told me that the neighbor 2 houses down had murdered his wife with a shotgun that night. The entire town knew, and he was arrested quickly. She had been shot at least twice. I asked if anyone else had been hurt, but my mom said it was just the wife. The town was close to a city with strict gun control laws, so firearms were rare. But here's what I can't stop thinking about. The first gunshot I heard, it didn't sound like the shotgun. It was sharper, more like a handgun. Who fired that first shot? Did the wife have a gun and try to defend herself? Was it just a drunk person, as I originally thought? Or did someone else die that night and no one knows about it? I've tried asking people in the town, but no one else seems to have heard that first shot. Just the 2 from the shotgun. It's a small town where everyone knows each other, but even they didn't suspect the neighbor was capable of this. I don't know if I want to know who fired that first shot. The uncertainty still haunts me. Story 11. When I was in 6th grade, my math teacher held a contest where teams of 2 had a week to guess how many jelly beans were in a large container. The team that guessed closest would win all the jelly beans. Kids were obsessed with it, counting individual jelly beans before class and walking around it, analyzing its size. One day, the teacher accidentally mentioned that the correct number was written on a piece of paper under the screw-on lid of the container. That gave me an idea. I approached a kid named Nate and told him I'd split my share of the jelly beans with him if he helped me. The plan was simple. On our way to lunch, Nate would tell the teacher he forgot his lunchbox and run back to the classroom. While there, he'd unscrew the lid, check the number, and then fill out a guess form with my and my partner's names on it. I specifically told him not to guess the exact number because that would look suspicious. By the end of the week, I won the contest. When Nate came to collect his share, I gave him 1 handful of jelly beans, just 1. He was furious, saying it wasn't fair, but I shrugged and basically told him, "What are you going to do about it?" Then I ate the rest of the 300 jelly beans over the next 3 days. I know I sound like a jerk, but I swear I'm not as bad as I was in 6th grade. I just really love sugar. I told this story to my wife once, and I think she sees me a little differently now. Story 12. I'm a gay man, and a while back I met an older guy online. We clicked immediately, playing games together, chatting a lot, even FaceTiming. I thought we were just good friends until one day he admitted that the only reason he started talking to me was because I seemed gay. He wasn't wrong. After a few dates, we ended up hooking up a few times. Then, just weeks later, my parents invited me to a family event to meet some distant relatives. I didn't really want to go, but my cousin convinced me it could be fun. At the event, I was surrounded by unfamiliar faces. My grandfather has 11 sisters and 2 brothers, so the family tree is massive. But then I saw someone I recognized, my internet friend. We pretended to be meeting for the first time and quietly tried to piece together how we were related. It turns out he's my grandfather's sister's son, my first cousin once removed. To make matters worse, he's married with 3 kids. He had told me he was single. After that awkward encounter, we distanced ourselves from each other, though we occasionally still play games together on Steam. I've never told anyone about this because, well, who would want to hear it? I had us with my first cousin once removed, and a married man. It's a secret I plan to keep to myself. Story 13. From fourth grade until my senior year of high school, one of my best friends was a compulsive liar. I loved this kid like a brother. We did everything together, and he had this amazing ability to make me forget about my own problems when we hung out. He was genuinely a nice guy, but the lies started early on, and I still remember the first one he told me. He claimed to have written a song and sang it for me. I instantly recognized the song but didn't call him out. I thought he was just joking. As time went on, the lies grew. By high school, he was lying about everything: his parents, his job, who he hung out with, and what he was doing when I'd ask him to hang out. For a while, I thought he just didn't like me anymore. After high school, we lost touch. Then one day I was out running and he stopped in his car. We hadn't spoken in years, but he pulled over and we ended up talking on the side of the road. He told me he missed me and wanted to hang out again. I followed through and messaged him a couple of days later. No response. After that, his life seemed to spiral out of control. He started arguing with his parents and eventually got kicked out of their house. In 2013, he moved in with another friend and their parents, but they kicked him out too. He ended up living out of his car. One night, he asked if he could crash at my place for a few nights. I said no, even though I could have said yes. By then, the years of lies had chipped away at our friendship. I didn't feel like he was my best friend anymore, or even a friend at all. After that night, we never spoke again. Story 14. When I was about 5 or 6 years old, I got in trouble for saying a silly word. My mom warned me that if I said it again, she'd wash my mouth out with soap. Being a kid, I inevitably said it again. True to her word, she dragged me into the kitchen, made me sit on the counter, and stuck a bar of soap in my mouth. I had to sit there with it for what felt like forever, and it tasted horrible. When my dad found out, he was furious. A massive argument broke out between my parents. It ended with my dad holding my mom down on the sofa by her throat and then taking me out of the house. We drove around all day, and I remember feeling like my whole world was falling apart. I didn't fully understand what was happening, but I knew things would never be the same. When we returned that evening, the house was in chaos. Bags were packed, and my mom had smashed a large glass-encased radio and vinyl player from the 80s. There was blood everywhere. My memory fades to black after that. Even as a kid, I knew something was profoundly wrong. That moment stayed with me, shaping who I am today. It's the root of my attachment and abandonment issues. It's why I find it so hard to trust anyone, and why the moment I sense something is off with someone, my defenses go up and I emotionally shut down. I do everything independently because relying on people has only ever let me down. This experience has left such a deep scar that I struggle to see myself ever having a truly happy relationship. Whoever I end up with would have to understand and accept these deeply ingrained issues. And honestly, I'm not sure anyone would want to take that on. Story 15. I used to work at an adult foster care group home, and it was one of the hardest experiences of my life. One of my coworkers was always high during her shifts, and her behavior quickly escalated into abuse toward the residents. I reported her to management multiple times, but no one took it seriously. Eventually, I had enough and decided to take matters into my own hands. I anonymously contacted CPS, Child Protective Services, and APS, Adult Protective Services, and reported the abuse. I also reached out to the Rights Office and other organizations, making as many calls as I could. Someone had to care about these vulnerable people, even if the management didn't. No one believed my claims until one of the residents was raped. That tragedy set off a chain reaction, and suddenly everyone wanted to know who had been anonymously complaining. They even suggested that the person should show their face, since they had been so right. I never came forward, but I was relieved when all the staff, including the managers, were investigated and ultimately fired. Still, I hated every moment of working there. I worked over 100 hours a week just to ensure the residents weren't being abused on my watch, but I still feel like I didn't do enough. Some days the guilt is overwhelming and takes away my appetite for weeks. I'll never understand why some people work at group homes if they don't genuinely care about the residents. No one forced them to take the job. It's not hard to be a decent human being, especially to those who can't fully comprehend or navigate life. Story 16. It was 1969, and I was 11 years old. My bedtime was 9 p.m., but around 9:30 the phone rang, and I picked up the extension near my bedroom. It was my mom's best friend Charlotte in absolute hysterics. Her ex-husband Jack had a rifle pointed at her, and I could hear him threatening to kill her. I was terrified, but what scared me even more was realizing that my mom was going to drive over to Charlotte's house to intervene. Back then, the police wouldn't respond to domestic disputes, so my mom felt she had no choice. Without her knowing, I threw on some shorts and quietly climbed into the back seat of the car, lying flat on the floor. I stayed silent as she drove across town into an incredibly dangerous situation. When we arrived, Charlotte was outside in just her bra and panties, blood dripping from her nose and ear. Jack stood nearby, holding a rifle aimed at her. My mom got out of the car and started talking to him. For over half an hour, she calmly but firmly negotiated with him until he finally handed her the rifle. She then helped Charlotte into the front seat of the car and drove us all to the police station. On the way there, Charlotte told us she had called the police 5 times that night, but no one would come. When we got to the station, my mom confronted the police chief. As I hid in the floorboard, I heard her address him by his first name, Mike, and threaten him. "I'm going to make sure you don't even get elected dog catcher if you don't go and throw him in jail now." Years later, we never spoke about that night, but it stuck with me. My mom passed away 6 years later, but her courage and strength that night have stayed with me ever since. She will always be my hero. Story 17. From 2015 to 2017, I worked for what I thought was my dream company. My dad had worked there for 20 years, and I believed they treated him well. The pay was great, and I loved the work. During those 2 years, I thrived, receiving great reviews and forming strong relationships with my clients. But after 2 years, the department was restructured, and the last 10 hires, myself included, were laid off. It felt like my world collapsed. My clients and managers complained to no avail, and though some clients wanted to hire me, their offers required relocation, which I couldn't afford. I tried to stay positive, leaning on the grit I'd inherited from my tough, military agricultural family, but being jobless for 3 months in a small town with limited opportunities and $1,700 a month in student loan debt weighed heavily on me. I've always owned firearms for hunting and protection. One night, while spiraling in my thoughts, I found myself holding one of my guns, considering the unthinkable. But when I checked the chamber, a wave of clarity hit me. I put the gun down and cried myself to sleep. A moment of vulnerability that was hard to admit as a 6'7", 300-pound man. The next morning, I collected all my weapons, guns, bullets, bows, arrows, knives, and gave them to my dad. I simply asked him to lock them up and told him I'd ask for them back someday. He didn't ask questions. He just agreed. Deep down, I think he knew what was going on, but he never brought it up. A week later, I reconnected with the woman who would later become my wife. She encouraged me to go back to church, where I found strength and purpose again. 4 months later, I secured a temp job, which led to another and eventually a full-time role in my current career field. About a year ago, just before I got married and moved out, I asked for my guns back. My dad handed them over without saying a word about that night years ago. No one knows I was contemplating suicide that night, outside of possibly my dad. It scares me to think how low I was, but I remind myself that I persevered. I don't share this with loved ones because I don't want them to worry, especially now that I'm in a much better place. Story 18. When I was living on an American military base in Germany, I used to sneak into the tiny convenience store and read porno magazines. I'd carefully open them on the shelves, pretending to look at something else, and read them while trying to be inconspicuous. My plan was to drop the magazine and act like I was reaching for something innocent if I got caught. One day I did get caught, and my plan failed miserably. The store clerk scolded me, saying the magazines were a pain to send back because of their plastic packaging. That wasn't the only time I got caught. I also tried stealing Pokemon cards using the same tactic, opening the packs on the shelf and pocketing the cards. Once, a random army guy caught me in the act. He sternly warned, "You cut that ish out before I send you to jail, son." That moment scared me so much that I almost literally shed my 11-year-old pants. After that, I kept my hands off the magazines and the cards, at least on base. Story 19. In high school, I tried to befriend a girl who didn't seem to have many friends. I went out of my way to be nice to her. I bought her lunch, lent her clothes, and even sent pizza to her family for dinner once. When a school dance came up, I found out she'd never been to one, so I decided to take her as a friend date. I went all out. I bought her a dress, but when she didn't like it, I let her wear my favorite dress and shoes instead. I wore the dress I'd originally bought for her. I took her to dinner and dessert, got her a corsage, and made sure everything was perfect. But as soon as we arrived at the dance, she disappeared. She didn't respond to my texts, and I didn't have anyone else to hang out with, so I left early. She stayed. When I saw her next, I asked for my dress and shoes back. She told me she'd bring them but didn't show up to school for weeks. When she finally returned, she said the dress was ripped and one of the heels on my shoes was broken. I was upset but told her it was fine and tried to move on. 2 days later, she stole $80 from my bag. The money wasn't even mine. It was for a club fundraiser. I reported it to the school, but they wouldn't do anything about it. That's when I decided to get back at her. Her boyfriend, who always flirted with me, sold coke. I convinced him to give me some for free and slipped it into her bag during gym. Then I reported her to campus security for the reward money. I thought she'd just get sent to boot camp for a week like everyone else. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal. But it turns out she'd been lying about her age. She was actually 21 and already on probation. She ended up going to prison. Part of me feels bad because I didn't mean to ruin her entire life. I just wanted to get some justice for how she treated me. But another part of me feels like she brought it on herself. Story 20. My father once told me a story from his youth and made me promise never to tell anyone. It's one of the most bizarre and haunting things I've ever heard. When he was around 20 years old, he met a couple of Argentinians who were eccentric hippies. They taught him how to make mushroom tea, a recipe that I now know too. After they left, my dad decided to try making the tea, not to drink it, but because he was fascinated with chemistry. He ended up with a dark black liquid, which he poured into a small Coca-Cola bottle. That same day, he was invited to a festa junina, a traditional country-themed party in Brazil. He brought the bottle with him, and for reasons he couldn't explain, poured the entire contents into a large cauldron of quentão, a mulled wine drink, when no one was looking. The rest of the night was absolute chaos. People were freaking out left and right, having panic attacks, seeing hallucinations, and thinking they were dying. Every time one person calmed down, another would start screaming or behaving wildly. My father watched in absolute terror as the entire party descended into madness, realizing what he had done. He never confessed to anyone and just kept quiet, horrified by the scene he'd created. To this day, the thought of that story haunts me. It's such an insane thing to imagine happening, and knowing my dad was behind it is both surreal and unsettling. Story 21. I'm deeply convinced that I'm going to become homeless. While this fear isn't uncommon among people with severe mental illness like me, it's not just fear. It's a persistent, all-encompassing belief. I spend so much time zoned out, imagining what it will be like and trying to plan for it. I think about how I'll survive, where I'll sleep, where I'll find food, and how I'll stay safe. When I'm out in my city, I scout places that look safe to sleep. I take mental notes of food banks, shelters, and places where I might shower or wash my clothes. I've even planned how I might get to a warmer state in the winter. I've been doing this for over a decade. Every day, my mind goes there. 2 people I grew up with became long-term homeless due to substance use and mental illness. Watching them slip through the cracks has reinforced this fear for me. Rationally, I know I have a loving partner and friends who would never let me end up on the streets. But a part of me is certain it's going to happen anyway. At its core, this belief comes from anxiety and a hyper-awareness of how fragile life is. Most people seem to subconsciously believe that things like homelessness can't happen to them. But I don't feel that way. I feel hyper-aware that terrible things can happen to anyone. I see people living on the streets and think, why not me? There's so little separating us. It feels like it all comes down to luck, and my luck has never been good. Story 22. When I was 15, I tried to take my own life. I overdosed on about 40 extra-strength Tylenol pills, the only thing I had access to at the time. A few hours later, as the realization of what I'd done set in, I panicked and stumbled into my parents' room in the middle of the night. I was terrified to tell them, but I did. They rushed me to the hospital, and I was flown via helicopter to a larger facility for treatment. Afterward, I spent 2.5 months at a residential treatment facility where I finished out the school year. Only my immediate family knows that I went to my parents for help. When I returned to school, rumors swirled about why I had left, and eventually people found out I had attempted suicide. I've never told anyone that I saved myself because I've always been afraid people would think I wasn't serious or that I just did it for attention. What most people don't know is that I had been carrying those pills with me for a long time, waiting for the right moment. On the night I finally did it, my little brother was asleep in the bunk bed above me. As I lay there waiting, the thought of him finding me the next morning is what ultimately saved me. That moment of clarity, the love I had for him, pushed me to get up and ask for help. It was the darkest time of my life, but I'm here now because I couldn't bear to hurt him. That thought stays with me to this day. Story 23. There was this girl I was friends with years ago, someone I cared about so deeply that I could say I loved her. I never told her though, not until I finally had the chance and chose to cast it aside. We were great friends and I loved her so much that I became whatever she needed me to be. Her confidant, her protector, her advisor, her chauffeur, and the guy who stayed sober so everyone could get home safely. I knew everything about her, her dreams, her fears, her wishes. I wiped her tears, made her laugh, and stood by her side no matter what. Around her, I felt like the best version of myself. A loyal knight, unshakable, always smiling, and ready to bring her joy. But she didn't know me beyond that. She never saw past the armor. My mind is a nightmare, shaped by a tough upbringing, riddled with anxiety, panic attacks, and a deep lack of self-respect. I struggled to sleep, felt like a zombie, and at my lowest points thought I might die at any moment. Yet I always stood by her, hiding everything I was going through. One night we were lying on the ground drinking, and she told me she loved me. It was the best feeling I've ever had, even to this day. But I couldn't accept her love. My life was a mess. Family issues, financial struggles, mental health problems, an uncertain future. I couldn't bring myself to share that burden with her. I couldn't let her see the broken person beneath the armor. So, I let her down gently, and it crushed me. I still think about that decision and wonder if it was the right one. Did I protect her from my chaos, or did I miss out on something beautiful? I'll never know. It's my little secret, now ours. Story 24. Forgive the format, I'm on mobile. I've been battling depression for about 10 years, maybe even longer. My life has been extraordinarily shy, but I've worked hard to make it better. I went from having no education to earning a degree and landing a job that pays $67,000 a year, all within 3 years. I married someone I truly loved, and he's been a good dad to my son. But then things fell apart. For 3 years, my husband ignored all my physical and emotional needs, even after I tried talking to him about it. Eventually, he cheated on me, and that was the breaking point. I snapped and told him I wanted a divorce. I moved out, got some of my life together, and tried to move on. My son stayed with my ex because he's in the final years of school, doing well academically for once, and I didn't want to disrupt that. I tell people it's better to be alone than to feel alone in a relationship, but honestly, I don't know anymore. I don't miss my ex or love him anymore, but I feel stuck. Sometimes I think about how I could disappear and it wouldn't make much of a difference. My son forgot my birthday and Mother's Day, and while holidays don't matter much to me, it reinforced this feeling of just existing, being here, but not really being seen. Don't worry, I'm not going to harm myself. My son depends on me, and even when he's grown and on his own, I refuse to leave him like my mom left me. I've thought about getting help, but deep down, I don't think talking to someone will change anything. For now, I just keep going, hoping things will feel better someday. Story 25. When I was around 15 or 16, I'm 28 now, I got into an online game called Gun Z The Duel. The game had an option to purchase in-game items using simple bank details, the account holder's name, bank account number, and the associated bank. Being a brilliant teenager, I thought, how hard could it be to get this info? After some digging, I stumbled upon an online forum for a web shop where people were posting these exact details, calling out sellers they suspected were scammers. I started using this information to buy tons of in-game merchandise. I justified it to myself by thinking, they're scammers, so it's not really wrong. This worked fine for a while, until one of the accounts I used turned out to belong to an innocent person who'd been falsely accused on the forum. That person noticed the unauthorized transactions, reported them to the police, and everything spiraled out of control. Detectives were assigned to the case, and it was treated as serious bank fraud. They eventually traced everything back to me. When they reached out, I panicked and came up with a story. I claimed that I'd been scammed by someone online who gave me the bank details and told me to use them for my transactions in the game. Shockingly, they believed me. The game officials cleared all the merchandise from my account and the case was closed. To this day, no one knows I was the mastermind behind the fraud. It's a secret I've kept all these years, and it'll stay buried here with this confession. Story 26. When I was about 10 or 11, I went to a friend's birthday pool party. There were around 15 other boys there, most of whom knew each other from school, but I didn't. I felt like an outsider. The pool was incredible, uniquely shaped with boulders, a rock water slide, and lots of hidden spots to hang out. One of the boys, Chet, stood out immediately. He was the stereotypical spoiled kid, athletic, rich, good-looking, and incredibly arrogant. Even though it wasn't his party or house, he acted like he was the leader. He hogged all the toys, made sure he was first for everything, and somehow everyone else seemed to adore him. At one point, we were throwing all sorts of balls in the pool, footballs, basketballs, beach balls, and it got chaotic. I noticed that with all the balls flying around, it was dangerous to keep your head up in the water if you were in the middle of the pool. So when Chet was in the middle of the pool, I positioned myself on a step near a boulder. It gave me cover and great leverage. I used every ounce of strength to throw a football at him from about 10 to 15 feet away. I didn't think I'd actually hit him, but I did, right in the side of his face. No one saw me do it or figured out the trajectory of the ball. It was so chaotic that people just shrugged and moved on. Chet, on the other hand, wailed and cried while everyone said, "I don't know who threw it. It could have been anyone." He was fine 30 minutes later and back to being his usual self, but I wasn't intimidated by him anymore. I've seen him a few times near where I grew up. He's still kind of a jerk, but seems happy enough with his life. Meanwhile, my world has grown much larger than his, and I'm very happy with where I am today compared to where he ended up. That moment in the pool? Let's just say it felt like a small, satisfying victory. Story 27. Years ago, I was a heavy drinker. Problematically so. Christmas has always been a big deal in my family, with relatives coming from all over the country to gather at my parents' house. Ironically, addiction and alcoholism are also big issues in my family. On Christmas Eve, I went to a CVS drive-thru to pick up some medication. After dropping off my prescription, I decided to head to my usual bar for a few drinks while it was being filled. Before long, they called to say my meds were ready, so I left the bar and picked them up. But since I had time to kill, I went back to the bar for more drinks. It was Christmas Eve, and everyone was buying rounds of shots. I drank hard, too hard. When I finally decided to leave, I knew I was wasted. At the time, I had a terrible routine of taking an Adderall to sober up when I needed to keep going. I was a bartender back then. So in my drunken haze, I instinctively took a pill and started driving home. On the way, I passed the same CVS I had been to earlier. I was so drunk that I thought I still needed to pick up my meds. I went through the drive-thru again and asked the pharmacist for my prescription. They awkwardly told me to wait a moment and walked away. The next thing I knew, I was being woken up by a bunch of cops. I had passed out in the drive-thru and the employees had called the police. They asked me to park the car and step out. At that moment, the gravity of the situation hit me. I realized I was about to get arrested on Christmas Eve, and my entire family would find out. The shame of disappointing my mom overwhelmed me. There were 11 officers surrounding me while I did the sobriety test. I knew I reeked of alcohol and expected to be arrested. After I finished the test, the officers huddled up and discussed amongst themselves. Finally, the main officer came back and said, "You don't seem too drunk, but I can smell alcohol on you. I'm not going to arrest you, but I can't let you drive." I was so relieved I almost cried. One of the deputies drove me home and scolded me the entire way about how lucky I was. He told me how dangerous my actions were and how easily this could have ended much worse. I've never told anyone this story, but it's one of the worst things I've ever done and gotten away with. It's a painful reminder of who I used to be. This happened over a decade ago, and I've since gotten help. I'm grateful to have turned my life around. Story 28. I come from a large family in a predominantly Islamic country. In this country, not only are Christians segregated, but they are also physically marked, similar to what happened during the Holocaust. My parents decided to convert to Christianity after I was born, and our lives turned into a nightmare. My Islamic relatives shunned my parents immediately. When I was 5, my grandmother arranged for me to be sold to the Brotherhood while my mom was at work. It turns out there were even doctors interested in buying me. That was the breaking point. We had to leave everything behind and flee the country. A relative helped to sponsor our visas, allowing us to escape, but things didn't improve much. Growing up, my parents and I were never invited to family parties, vacations, or gatherings. While my extended family formed bonds and built memories, I stood on the outside, watching from a distance. To make things worse, my dad, a sociopath, became a leader in another religious community. He preached values he didn't live by, making me resent religion even more. I've never shared this with anyone because of the ignorance and judgment surrounding anti-Islamic hate. People don't realize that many girls wearing hijabs don't have a choice. Behind every child forced to cover their hair is a set of parents threatening them with rejection from God if they don't comply. I've grown to hate all religions, especially Islam. Religion doesn't unite people. It creates division, imposes rules that strip away humanity, and fills people with fear under the guise of morality. It promises rewards like 72 virgins and a spot next to God. But in reality, it only enslaves people with false guidelines, robbing them of their power. Story 29. Years ago, I worked as a field tech in IT support. One day, I called ahead to my next stop, about 20 minutes away, to let the point of contact know I'd be there soon to upgrade some equipment. She mentioned she had to run to another office but would leave the door unlocked because someone was coming by to pick up a package. When I arrived, the office was empty, just as she said, so I got to work swapping out the old gear for the new. As I was about to pack up and leave, I was suddenly hit with a "I have to sha now" feeling. I ran to the bathroom and did my business. After flushing, I went to wash my hands, but then I heard an ominous sound. The toilet started backing up. Shh, piss. And toilet paper began bubbling over the rim and flooding the floor. The smell was horrendous, and it wasn't just mine. I think the septic tank must have been backing up. Panicked, I had no idea what to do. So I made the terrible decision to put the old equipment back the way I found it and leave. I called the contact and lied, saying I'd been held up at my last appointment and would need to reschedule for the following week. When I returned the next week, the office was undergoing renovations. I casually asked what had happened, and she said the guy who came to pick up the package had apparently clogged the toilet, causing it to overflow. She mentioned that he denied using the bathroom. If you're reading this, package guy, I'm so sorry. Life hadn't prepared me for that moment, and you took the fall for it. Story 30. When I was around 10 to 12 years old, I had Ross River fever for about a month. It caused swelling, pain, and exhaustion. I couldn't go to school and was essentially bedridden. We lived in the Australian outback, so babysitters weren't an option. My parents had to work, but my dad would check on me during lunch breaks. Other than an incident with shooters on the property, everything went fine. I was too weak to even get out of bed, so there wasn't much trouble I could get into. About a year later, we had a creative writing assignment at school, and I decided to write a fictional story inspired by that time. I made up an elaborate tale about how I'd somehow managed to pull my wardrobe over with the door open, trapping myself inside it in the dark, too weak to escape and with no one to help me all day. My mom, unfortunately, was a notorious snoop. She had zero respect for my privacy and went through my things regularly. One time she found a Reader's Digest under my pillow and, without checking, assumed it was an underwear catalog and hit me with it. One day I came home from digging forts or wandering the scrub, and I found her in my room, clutching my creative writing book and crying her eyes out. She thought my fictional story was real and that I'd been trapped in a wardrobe while I was sick. I was furious that she had read my writing but decided to play along. I told her it really happened, even managing to squeeze out a tear for good measure. She was beside herself with guilt and terrified that the teachers would find out I'd been left alone while I was so ill. Nearly 30 years later, she still brings it up occasionally, saying it haunts her to this day. She's still just as nosy and disrespectful of people's privacy, so I've never told her the truth. She'll likely go to her grave believing that story was real. Story 31. When my friend and I were 7 years old, we had a neighbor named Tracy who lived across the street. Tracy was awesome. She was friendly and had 2 big golden retrievers we loved to play with. Whenever we saw her outside with her dogs, we'd usually run over to talk to her and spend time with them. One day, we wanted to visit her and her dogs. We knocked on her front door but got no response. Being the stupid kids we were, we decided to check her sliding patio door. When we found it locked, my friend grabbed a rock and started smashing the lock until it broke. We let ourselves into the house thinking we'd find her dog somewhere inside. The house was eerily quiet, but we didn't think much of it. As we searched, I spotted a bowl of Hershey's Kisses on the kitchen counter and decided to help myself. I ate at least 15 to 20 of them, leaving the wrappers scattered on the counter. Meanwhile, my friend went upstairs and found $5 in Tracy's bedroom. He decided to take it so we could buy ice cream from the truck that came through our neighborhood daily. After exploring for a bit, we heard the ice cream truck outside. We left Tracy's house, bought ice cream, and didn't think twice about what we'd done. A few days later, we saw Tracy parking a U-Haul truck in her driveway. We ran over to say hi and asked her about the truck. She told us that someone had broken into her house, eaten her candy, and stolen money from her bedroom. She said she was moving to live with her mom because her ex-boyfriend, who had been stalking her for 5 years, had likely found her again. Tracy believed he was responsible for the break-in. We acted shocked and said, "What a jerk," not realizing the gravity of what we had done. Later, the police came by to take statements from Tracy and the neighbors. Luckily, they didn't come to my house. 20 years later, I ran into Tracy at an H&M store. We caught up for 2 hours talking about life, music, and movies. At one point, she brought up the break-in from years ago, saying her ex was arrested a couple of months later and charged with theft and breaking and entering. I smiled and said, "Good thing you caught him," while hiding the truth about that day. Story 32. As a kid, my dad was distant and uninvolved. He never took us on holidays, to the movies, or to restaurants, even though we could afford it. He seemed to despise my mom, likely because their marriage was arranged. Very common in India. He focused entirely on work, rarely asked how I was feeling, and never gave me advice. He was like a robot coming home, eating, sleeping, and going back to work the next morning. To be fair, he probably had a lot of work stress, as he was a scientist in one of India's top institutes. Still, his lack of engagement hurt. Fast forward to when I moved to Europe, graduated, and started my career. Our relationship had started to improve, and I began sharing more with him. One day I saw a heartfelt post on Facebook about how to raise kids and sent it to him. I didn't think much of it, but he called me soon after, clearly panicked. For the first time, he opened up to me, crying as he apologized for how he had been as a father. I assured him that I was doing well and that it didn't matter anymore. 2 days later, my mom called me repeatedly during the night due to the time difference. When I finally answered, she told me my dad had suffered a heart attack and passed away. I can't shake the feeling that my message made him realize his mistakes and overthink them to the point of triggering the heart attack. I've never told anyone in my family about this. They all believe his death was due to work stress. I still vividly remember his last phone call and how emotional he was. The guilt of possibly contributing to his death weighs on me, even though I know he loved me. Story 33. Years ago, I spent my summers working at a camp deep in the woods. The camp was spread out, with activities and buildings scattered throughout. One weekend, everyone had gone out to enjoy the day off. I decided to have a little me time and went into town for a nice Mexican dinner. A plate of quesadillas smothered in queso sounded perfect. After dinner, I headed back to camp, parking in the staff parking area, which was a dirt road in the woods. From there, it was about a 7 to 8 minute walk to the main camp area. It was around 7:30 p.m., and I figured I had plenty of time to get back and relax before anyone else returned. But then, the rumblings began, the kind that signals something serious. At first, I brushed it off. I've been in situations before where I had to wait a while to find a bathroom, and I've always managed to hold it together. But this time, it was different. As I walked, the urgency hit like a freight train. Beads of sweat started forming on my forehead. My gut felt like it was staging a full rebellion. I picked up my pace and then panic set in. I don't think I'm going to make it. The pool house came into view. Yes, salvation! It was empty and I knew I could slip in unnoticed. I was so close. 25 steps away, then 20 steps, then 15. I clenched harder, praying for strength. 10 steps. The dam burst. I froze mid-stride, desperately trying to stop the flood, but it was too late. My bowels betrayed me in the most epic way. Once the immediate pressure subsided, I regained enough composure to shuffle my way to the pool house. Cheeks clenched, dignity hanging by a thread. Inside, I made it to the toilet just in time for round 2. What followed was a scene straight out of the infamous Amazon reviews for Haribo sugar-free gummy bears. Wave after wave of destruction left me in awe of my own digestive system. The boxers? Beyond saving. They had heroically absorbed the worst of the disaster and had to be retired. I found a plastic grocery bag, wrapped up the evidence, and silently said a few words of gratitude for their sacrifice. Commando and humbled, I made my way back to main camp. I found a trash can tucked away from the main paths and discreetly deposited the bag. By some miracle, no one was around to witness my shame. To this day, I'm grateful for those form-fitting, stretchy boxers. If you ever need a pair of underwear that can keep your secrets safe, trust me, invest in good ones. They just might save your dignity, or at least most of it. Story 34. When I was 8 years old, I almost did something horrifying to my 3-year-old brother, though at the time, I didn't realize just how bad it could have been. We were at a playground with one of those multi-level towers with ladders and slides. There had been some construction nearby, and on a previous visit, my friend and I had, for reasons I can't explain, hauled a couple of cinder blocks up into the tower. On this particular day, I was up there alone when I saw my little brother toddling over. I had some tension with him, as siblings often do, but I distinctly remember not feeling malicious. I wasn't thinking about hurting him, much less killing him. I just thought it would be funny to scare him. As he reached the base of the ladder, I pushed one of the cinder blocks over the edge. To this day, I don't know exactly what happened. He wasn't directly under the block when it landed. It only clipped the tip of his big toe. I assume he stepped back or slipped, but instead of a life-altering tragedy, he ended up with a broken toenail. He screamed. My mom came running, and a trip to the ER ended with some nail trimming and a bandage. No lasting harm. Now my family jokes about it as the beginning of my brother's extremely injury-prone childhood. They have no idea how close it could have been. I laugh along, but inside I can't help wondering if that moment says something darker about me. Story 35. When I was in high school, my family went out of town for a weekend and left me home alone, trusting I'd be responsible. And I mostly was a good kid, but I was also a teenager. Naturally, I invited some friends over to drink beer, smoke weed, and smoke shisha. During the night, one of my friends, in a drunken stupor, dropped a coal from the shisha onto the hardwood kitchen floor. It burned a quarter-sized hole. I knew my parents would be furious if they found out. There was no doubt in my mind that there would be serious consequences. For the first week after they returned, I was a nervous wreck, waiting for them to notice. Nothing. By the second week, I realized I needed to cover my tracks. One day, while my mom was making dinner, I casually walked into the kitchen, pointed at the burn mark, and let out a surprised gasp. "Mom, what's this burn mark on the floor? Did you drop something?" She looked at it, thought for a moment, and said, "Oh, I must have dropped something hot while cooking." That was it. The mark never came up again. I was in the clear, and my cover story held strong. Looking back, I'm amazed I pulled it off. But the stress of those first 2 weeks was enough to make me think twice about throwing another party. Story 36. This is one of those wild stories I don't talk about with anyone except the 2 friends who were there with me. A few years back, we went to a new wing restaurant that had just opened, excited to check it out. We were enjoying some beers when suddenly, across the room, this guy threw a glass at a waitress's feet, thankfully missing her, and started shouting. He and his girlfriend looked like they were on something. Meth, most likely. After yelling for a bit, the guy stormed into the bathroom with his girlfriend. While he was in there, my friends and I quietly agreed that if he came out and started trouble, we'd have to step in since most of the other customers were older or women. When he finally came out, it seemed like he was leaving peacefully. The manager had already called the cops, so we figured it was over. But as he was walking out, an older man in his 60s said, "You need some respect." That set the guy off. He turned around and punched the older man in the face. In a split second, I jumped up and tackled the guy into the bar area, knocking over stools and tables in the process. I pinned him down and started dragging him out of the restaurant, but his girlfriend began punching me in the back and neck. While I was trying to block her, the guy got loose and started swinging at me. I'd had enough. I grabbed him by the neck with both hands and slammed him against the window. Then, in a final burst of frustration, I threw him onto an older couple's table, which broke apart, sending beer, nachos, and wings flying everywhere. At that point, his girlfriend screamed, "He's only got one arm, let him go! For F's sake, let him go!" I immediately froze. The guy had been wearing a leather jacket, so I hadn't realized he was missing an arm. Horrified, I let him go, but then he picked up a chair with his one arm and tried to swing it at me. My friend stepped in and knocked him down with one punch, The couple quickly fled before the cops arrived. When the police got there, they took our statements. The officer asked if I wanted to press charges, and I replied, "What would I get, his other arm?" Everyone laughed, including the cop, and we were let go since it was clear I was defending myself and others. The restaurant was trashed, so we ended up going to another place to finish the night. My friends and I don't talk about it much because, well, we beat up a one-armed man. Even if he deserved it, it's not a story people tend to react well to. Story 37. When I was 15, my family hosted our annual 4th of July party, a tradition I always looked forward to. It was a mix of family, friends, and co-workers. My dad's best friend Jim was a regular at these parties, and that year, he brought some family members who were staying with him for the summer. 2 nephews and a niece named Emily. The moment I saw Emily, I was stunned. She was my age, and to me, absolutely perfect. Looking back, she was probably just a bit above average in terms of looks, but in my eyes, she was everything. I couldn't stop thinking about her, but was too shy to even say hello. I figured I had time. She was staying with Jim, and I could work up the courage eventually. A week later, I overheard my dad and Jim talking and learned that Emily and her brothers were only visiting from out of state on the other side of the country. My heart sank. I felt like I had blown my chance, and the thought of never seeing her again hit me hard. For months, I was down on myself for not having the confidence to talk to her. By January, I decided I needed to change. I realized my self-consciousness about my appearance was holding me back, so I started lifting weights. My cousin, who was into fitness, helped me out, and by the time summer rolled around, I had transformed. I went from 135 pounds to just over 180, and people started noticing. As July approached, I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nerves. I thought, what if Emily comes back? I was ready this time, but she didn't. That year, I came to terms with the fact that I'd probably never see her again. I felt like all my effort had been for nothing. To this day, I've never told anyone about Emily or how she inspired me to start lifting. I also haven't felt that way about anyone else since. She'll always be the person who unknowingly pushed me to grow, even if we never had a single conversation. Story 38. I had a cat who was peeing all over the house. She never used her litter box, and I couldn't figure out why. Over the course of months, I took her to the vet at least 5 times to check her health, her bladder, and for urinary crystals. We tried 2 different anti-anxiety medications and even an antidepressant. Out of desperation, I hired a cat behaviorist, but she turned out to be completely unhelpful. Either a scammer or delusional. She claimed that the lack of crystals and calming energy in the house was the issue, and recommended getting rid of certain paintings and home decor in colors cats couldn't see, arguing that it made the cat feel alienated. I kicked her out of my house after 1 hour, though I still paid her. Despite all my efforts, the problem persisted. My other cat began peeing in the same spots as her, and my house started to reek of cat urine. The floors were ruined, the urine seeped into the baseboards and plaster of the old house, and the smell was unbearable, especially during humid summers. I felt like I was living in a litter box. The breaking point came when my 1-year-old daughter crawled through a puddle of pee we hadn't spotted yet. That was it. I had been trying to rehome the cat for months, thinking maybe the other cat was bullying her when she tried to use the litter box. But after countless failed attempts, I gave up. I drove her to a city shelter. They made it clear she would be put down that same afternoon if I left her there. I left in tears, devastated by what I was doing. She was a sweet, loving, and cuddly cat who adored me. I knew she wasn't peeing out of spite. Something was wrong, and I couldn't fix it. She trusted me, and I betrayed her. 2 days later, I received a response to one of my old ads. A kind woman offered to take her in and give her a fresh start. It was 2 days too late. If I just held out a little longer, my cat might have lived and found a home where she could be happy. To this day, I can't forgive myself for what I did, and I'll never tell my wife or kids about it. They don't know I had a potential solution within reach. My cat deserved better than what I gave her, and it haunts me still.